You left your toxic job and you expected it to be over when you walked out the door, but it wasn't. You were constantly anxious and on edge. You do not trust your boss or your coworkers. And if we're being really honest, your confidence is still in the gutter. This has an enormous cost to your career and your paycheck. In today's video, we are going to talk about the 3 reasons you are not getting over your toxic job, including the one that sabotages 80% of people after they leave their toxic job, and the one simple action you can take today to dramatically accelerate your post-toxic job recovery. The first reason you are not getting over your toxic job is a mistake nearly everyone I have spoken to has made when they left their toxic workplace. But for it to make sense, there's one thing you need to know. Toxic jobs are addictive. Toxic work environments are full of drama, gossiping coworkers, micromanaging bosses, people taking credit for other people's work. The same system in your brain that makes it impossible for you to put your phone down is activated when you are in sustained stress. And we all know that toxic workplaces keep us chronically stressed. This is crucial for you to cope with your stress when you are in the stressful work environment. But when you leave, your brain seeks dopamine, which brings you to Glassdoor to read negative reviews of your toxic ex company. It perks up your ears when your spies who are on the inside still text you an update like your toxic boss was finally fired. You daydream about getting revenge on your toxic job. You left your toxic job, but not the drama. This is why one of the top complaints I hear from people who leave a toxic workplace is this: my new job is boring. Healthy, positive work environments are boring after a toxic job. You no longer have to be hyper aware and hyper alert of everything you do or say. There is little to no workplace drama to talk about or rant about after work. Without a toxic boss to trauma bond over, you might not have much in common with your coworkers. It's like trying to watch a serious documentary about the plight of plankton after binging trashy yet hilarious reality shows. You know one is better for you, but the other one you just can't turn away from. When you're in a boring job, one of 2 things happens. Either it turns toxic, which we'll come back to in a minute, or you replay and engage with your toxic workplace trauma. The thing about our brains is this: when we think about past experiences, our brains don't really differentiate between what happened from what's happening now, which means the rumination a lot of people tend to do after leaving a toxic work environment, like getting updates from your work bestie who's still there, triggers your brain in the exact same way it did as when you were in that toxic job. Your toxic job stays your drama supply and you do not move past it. Which brings me to the second reason why you can't get over your toxic job. This also happens to be one of the biggest fears people have when they leave a toxic job. And too often it plays out. In fact, I can confidently say you've had this fear and maybe lived it too. You are terrified that your next job will be toxic. Many of the people I speak to haven't had one toxic job. Once they leave their toxic job, they quickly find themselves in another one, which is often unexpected because you are highly aware of the signs of a toxic job. There are a few reasons why this will make you find yourself in what I call the toxic job loop, going from toxic job to toxic job. The first is what got you in a toxic workplace in the first place. No one takes a job thinking,
this seems moderately toxic.
You accepted the job because it was presented as a good opportunity. Toxic companies conceal who they are. I've told this story before, but in my toxic workplace, one of my coworkers would misrepresent the work culture in job interviews. When I asked him why, he shared his thoughts.
Because if I told them what it was like, no one would want to work here.
Just like how you are presenting your best self in a job interview so that the company wants to hire you, companies present their best self so that you want to work for them. The next is something I mentioned a moment ago. Your hyper-awareness makes you extremely aware of toxic job red flags. Nothing gets past your toxic job detection skills, am I right? That boring job you're in maybe become toxic for this very reason. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Workplace toxicity is an individual experience. What you have been through predisposes you to future toxic work experiences because of this awareness, but also because of one more thing. This is common, and it's a top blind spot for toxic job escapees. Most go months, even years, completely unaware of it, and it can turn any job toxic. To understand it, we need to go back to your toxic workplace. When you were in your toxic job, you adapted to the environment. You proactively communicated with your super micromanaging boss to keep them off your back. You guarded yourself from your coworkers to avoid toxic office gossip. You may have even minimized your visibility at work to stay below the radar and not become a target of your toxic boss or coworker. You developed these behaviors to survive your toxic workplace, and they became habits. But in a neutral or healthy work environment, these are maladaptions that restage a toxic work dynamic. The thing about these adaptions is they're nearly impossible to spot because you've never navigated through toxic job recovery before. So you have no idea what to look for or where to look for it. I have something that will help rapidly reveal these toxic job coping mechanisms so that you can deactivate them. I'll come back to later in this video. But there is one more reason why you cannot get over your toxic job. And if you're watching this, I can almost guarantee it is sabotaging your toxic job recovery. To understand it, I want to talk you briefly through the crucial phases of toxic job recovery. The first is denial, which everyone experiences. This is part of the grieving process, even before you leave your toxic job. When you made the decision to leave and shortly after you left, you questioned yourself. Was that job really toxic or was it just me? Most of my clients are grappling with this exact question when they meet me. And this is one of the reasons why you probably stayed longer than you should have in your toxic job. But where you are now is this, an awareness. You know the job is toxic. You know who was toxic. You know on a superficial level what made the job toxic. When you entered this phase, what did you do? Most people do a few things. The first is listening to other toxic job stories. I was on TikTok the other day and I stumbled upon an account that has blown up, and all the host does is read toxic job story submissions. The reason you're listening to these stories is simple. Being in a toxic job is isolating. One of the most common tactics in a toxic work environment is for the aggressor to isolate their target, i.e. you. Even if you were not totally isolated, your friends at work might not have thought it was a good work environment, but they didn't necessarily experience the toxicity you did, at least not in the same way you did. And this can make you feel incredibly alone. And then you discover there's a whole community of people that have been through it. It is such a relief. In fact, I want you to say hi to each other below because I think the bond that we share is instrumental in our path to getting over our toxic jobs. It's also validating to hear stories just like yours to help you stay in awareness. You don't want to gaslight yourself back into denial after all, which is also why you have learned a lot about toxic workplaces. You're trying to understand your experience, so you are doing exactly what you have done anytime you've needed to understand and solve a problem in your life. You are learning all the dimensions of it. You know all of the signs of a toxic workplace. You've watched a million videos about it, but you will still stop your scroll and click when a new one pops up because you want to make sure you're not missing a thing. You have learned about the toxic dynamics at play. You may even have diagnosed your toxic boss or toxic coworker with a personality disorder or two. You know more about narcissism than you ever thought you would. You have psychoanalyzed everyone you worked with and tried to understand why they did what they did. But in all of this, you miss the only rabbit hole that leads to healing. Don't get me wrong, I intellectualize experiences too. We're smart people, it's what we do. But in the process, you have externalized your experience. Let me say that again because I want to make sure everyone got it. You are externalizing your experience. When we're talking about toxic workplaces, what we're really talking about is workplace trauma. I know that is a scary word, and most of you are not comfortable using it. Strangely, while our culture identifies us by our jobs, it tells us the adversity we face at work isn't that deep, making us undermine our own experiences. The toxicity isn't what happened to you, how you were treated, or the actions or motivations of others. The toxicity is in how you experience those events and what they did to you internally. This is why no one can say anything that will heal you from your toxic job. I don't care how many videos you watch or books you read. I promise if there were magic words that would instantly get you over your toxic job, it would be the only video on my channel. In fact, even if the toxic person that you worked with became accountable and apologized to you for what they did, it would only make you feel better for a minute. but it wouldn't heal you. Getting over your toxic job doesn't come from anywhere besides going inside. The reason why you can't get over your toxic job is you are carrying your baggage. You are stuck in awareness. And until you release your toxic job, it's going to haunt you. Which brings us to why so many people get stuck. One of the biggest mistakes people make is they think time heals all wounds. If you were bullied in primary school, you know that's not true. I've known people that have retired and are still tortured by the bullying they experienced on the playground. Toxic jobs also aren't things that you shake off or brush off, which unfortunately is a lot of the messaging out there. Getting over a toxic job requires you to understand what really made that work experience toxic for you, identify the beliefs, behaviors, and habits, and deactivate them, and move intentionally forward. This is below the surface work. It requires you to touch some of the triggers that you're left with from your toxic job. It's the only way to unpack those bags and leave them where they belong instead of bringing that workplace trauma with you wherever you go. The biggest struggle most of my clients have here is getting started. First, because they have no idea what this process looks like. And second, because getting help can be incredibly overwhelming. Your toxic workplace has left your nervous system shot. You're exhausted, and you need to build momentum using a simple process with a bit of guidance, which is exactly why I created the Get Over Your Toxic Job Guidebook. I actually developed this for a workshop that I ran earlier this year, and as I do with all my workshops, I went extra. When it was complete, I realized it was the perfect place to start your toxic job recovery. You'll learn the basics about the experience that you had because we don't want to externalize, but you need to know what is happening in your brain and your body. You'll create a safe space to dock at whenever you need. And with guided prompts, you are going to spot and destroy the toxic beliefs and habits that will keep you stuck in the toxic job loop. You can get it at toxicworkplacerecovery.com. Which brings me to the most important part of this video. You deserve to heal from your toxic job. Your toxic boss and your toxic coworkers do not deserve to live in your head rent-free. Getting over your toxic job means releasing them and any significance they have in your career. They do not deserve to matter, but you do. No matter what the next step looks like in your toxic job recovery, unpacking those bags is crucial. I hope you get your hands on the Get Over Your Toxic Job Guidebook. In my next video, we are talking about the true toxic job signs that you need to watch out for because shockingly, no one is talking about these. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and I will see you there. In the meantime, we need to talk about trust after a toxic job. I get into it in this video.